Hey everyone, Georgia here with Ukraine Matters. We have a lot of things to talk about, so let's jump straight in because, oh my god, this one is gonna be a big one. So, we start with the Kherson region, and the most notable part here in the Kherson region is that in the latest night and morning, basically, we've heard that around the area of Chongar, right here at the south, there was a strike on the two bridges that go over this kind of like I don't even know how to say. It's a two bridges that go over water. Like it's a transit line where they were struck with something. Now Russians are stating that it's Storm Shadow. However, a lot of people that are kind of experts in explosives, they said that the explosive damages that are demonstrated are too low to be Storm Shadow because Storm Shadow is kind of a lot heavier missile. So it's a little bit unclear. It might be Storm Shadow missile, it might not, but the strikes were quite precise. We'll see more. We'll see if there will be a continuing strikes on these bridges. Most probably, then it's not going to be Storm Shadow because Storm Shadows I'm expecting to be kind of in deficit. But all in all, it's good news because this obviously continues the trend of sabotaging logistics of Russians towards the Zaporizhia region, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this. But firstly, let's cover the situation around Dnipro and Kherson area here. I want to talk about that one because while the logistics are definitely a problem, the bigger problem for Russians is that after they blew up the Novakakhovka Dam, they were so afraid of the attack from Ukrainians that they thought since they're going to blow it up, then they're going to prevent the big attack from Ukrainians, and therefore they moved some of their reserves to protect the direction of Orikhiv. Well, now the situation is that the Novakakhovka reservoir is almost completely drained, and now Russians have to put back the reserves that they've pulled out before, except now they don't have the fortified positions that they were building there because they got washed away, and now they have a bigger problem because it's now the Ukrainians that are controlling the flow of the river because it's Ukrainians that are controlling the slush gates around Zaporizhia, or maybe sludge gates, sorry, I don't know precisely how it's called. In any case, that is the problem for Russians. So if Ukrainians did indeed plan any kind of attack over the river, like maybe a special forces attack or something else, then now it's going to be easier for Ukrainians because they will be able to control the flow of the river a lot better, and they will be able to essentially execute whatever attack they were planning because there's also fewer Russian defenses and they're only building now their new ones. Moreover, the problem doesn't stop there. People have asked me, oh, Georgie, we've seen pictures of like these areas and they look dry AF. Like, does it mean that Ukraine will just roll over them? And unfortunately not. It's many, many kilometers of supposedly dry land. The problem is that what's under that initial kind of dry layer on top is actually meters and meters and meters of really wet soil. And while maybe some lighter vehicles can drive on that sand, the heavier vehicles will just, as soon as they reach it, it will be just a quicksand for them. They will just go under, and to get it dried out properly, people have been saying like many months, like half a year to maybe a whole year. So it's not going to be fast, it's not going to be easy, and definitely it's not something that can be done. But continuing the previous discussion about special forces, maybe we're planning something around the Kherson area over the river. As I told you, the light vehicles indeed can move over the sand. So if Ukraine has any kind of light vehicles that they would be okay trying to run over these small river areas, maybe boats, maybe something else, now they can. Now they can, because now Russia has gotten quite a longer border that is not just protected by a river that they need to pay attention to again. That is not good for Russians. That is not good for Russians. And you're going to start noticing a pattern here. Beyond that, talking about the general perception of what the Ukrainian general staff wants to achieve in Ukraine, we already start seeing the formation of the plan, what they were hoping for. Now, At the start of this week, there was a speculation about Ukraine is going to have some kind of operative pause. That speculation happened because the ISW, the Institute for Study of War, have posted a quote from the one of the Estonian intelligence chief, I believe it was, that said that Ukrainians are not going to be executing their counteroffensive in this coming week. But he said it in a little bit of a weird way because he was talking about the subject and then he used a little bit the words that either got mistranslated to English or something. And there was this chain of misunderstanding. And a lot of people picked up from the internet ISV article about it, and they thought that it's going to be an operative pause that Ukraine is going to go into. That was not the case. And that was basically what I was thinking. But I still thought about, but what did this guy actually meant? And basically listening to more of the analysts, I finally understood also what was the meaning behind the original phrase that you were saying, and that was that Ukraine has executed their initial offensive. Ukraine has started their attack. They're undermining Russian positions. They're moving toward that second line of defense, and they're advancing quite fast compared to many other different offensives. Tempo of Ukrainian advances are quite good, especially because we know that Russians are really trying to prevent Ukrainians reaching those trenches, and they're literally counterattacking into the fields. This is something we've seen on the videos everywhere. It's not going that well and that successful, but they're still trying to do so. What initially was meant is that Ukraine has executed the initial offensive stage, and now it's going to be essentially a fork in the road. Before the counteroffensive before the offensive of Ukrainians started, it was understood that it's not going to be just one plan and Ukraine is just going to go head straight. People have been asking me, like, Georgie, how far do you think Ukraine will go? And I said, to a large extent, it will be dependent on what's going to be the response of the Russians. Like, will the Russian forces surrender en masse and just run away, and then maybe Ukraine can enter Crimea? Will it be like a slower where they're going to try to stick and fight, and so on? And we see that it's going to be the defense that Russians are putting up is a little bit more rigid than just running away entirely. So that means that the initial stage was already starting to show itself. The initial forces, they found out the weaknesses of Russia. They found out where they can gain some ground. They found out where they can reach some of the forward positions, and it's good. And it was already seeming that by this point, by this week, this first stage already was kind of, like wrapping up. Like, we're getting into this tempo, and it was basically like a go, no-go kind of decision stage. It's another gate of the offensive that Ukraine is aiming to open or not open. Like, for example, if Ukraine understands that Russian dominance in the air is complete, that, for example, that the losses that they're sustaining because they do not have enough air power themselves are not sufficient, therefore, if they would like to cut losses, this would be a perfect moment to stop, because the damages that Ukraine received during this offensive was minimal, and they could stop it right now if they want to until they get F-16s. That would be a possibility. However, it's not a very good option because there is a lot of political stakes with this offensive. So I don't really think that Ukraine has the possibility to stop the offensive going. So it's going to happen. So the other thing then, what would be discussed would be, what is the scale of the offensive? How far can we actually reach? And right now, Ukraine is basically starting to shaping. Now, it's maybe just was to scare the Russians, but essentially, I think that Crimea right now is completely out of the question. I believe the fact that Ukraine is now hitting the bridges on Chongar, it's damaging to the logistics, but I believe it's also because Ukraine is thinking that, hey, we're probably not going to go in Crimea. So most probably, at least right now, the plan would be for Ukrainians is to obviously cut the land bridge and maybe get to the entry to Crimea, to then continue shelling the Crimean bridge and essentially make Crimea a big trap. That's kind of I believe, is the current at least goal. We're going to see how the next stage will go. But someone described it as this, like, that this kind of offensive that Ukraine is doing is that they have certain gates and certain evaluation points at which they have multiple options how to proceed next. And this makes sense for me, and I believe this is exactly what's happening. And another mentioned that most probably Ukraine would want to start the next stage of offensive before the NATO summit in Vilnius, because I believe that Ukraine would want to have some results on the table, which means that most probably, like, the summit in Vilnius is around 11th and 12th of July. So most probably before 11th and 12th of July, we're going to see a next kind of stage of Ukrainian offensive starting. It's not guaranteed. I might be wrong. It was just a guess by some people discussing in the studio that I watched this, but it's a definite possibility. With that said, that's kind of the big picture overview. So let's kind of jump in and see where we are on our kind of tactical positions. And on tactical positions here on the west side, Ukrainians are now fighting for the village of Zherebyanki, and it's important because it's a high point. It's one of the highest points in the areas. And essentially, if Ukraine controls Zherebyanki, that means that they basically going to start seeing very nicely down the line towards Vasiliivka. Russians are already claiming that Ukrainians already took the highest point because it's supposedly like on this northern part of the village somewhere here, this high point. But we haven't seen confirmation because obviously there is no videos of Ukrainians capturing it yet, and Russians, they don't tend to show their losses. We only hear about them. With regards to Robotne, yesterday Prigozhin was claiming a lot of things, and some people were not sure if this is accurate or not. Now I definitely have confirmation. We know that Ukrainians have advanced towards Robotne. Village is probably not yet liberated, at least not that Russians were yelling about this, but there are definitely fighting that is happening, at least for the north side of the settlement. Therefore, Russians are indeed in trouble, as Prigozhin was saying. Which also obviously discussed that, does it mean that there is also something happening in Urozhaine, because this is where also Prigozhin said that Ukrainians already took control. I cannot confirm that control has been taken, but I do know that there is definitely activity very, very close to the city. This is something I can definitely share. So Staromayorske, which is quite an important part on the Russian defense, is pretty much up there. So I would not be surprised if these two villages would be liberated in the coming days. We'll see about that. But right now we know that progress of Ukrainians is being hindered in the area because Russians are just attacking through the fields. Obviously, if enemy is just throwing their bodies at you, why would you try to counterattack? You can just, dig into your positions and then just destroy the attacking force if Russians wish to do so. Destroy Russians, Ukrainians do, because we continue seeing incredible numbers of vehicles, incredible numbers of artillery systems being destroyed, and incredible numbers of specialized systems being destroyed. Ukrainian high-precision weapons that they stockpiled for the whole winter is doing the work. Ukraine is doing really, really good with destroying a lot of Russians. Most important, kind of the biggest thing that was a little bit worrisome, what Prigozhin said, is he mentioned that there was Russian forces in the village of Sadove, which is in the area of Tokmak, just north of it here. This is already known. There was actually videos from Ukrainian special forces operating behind the enemy lines. And now we see basically, this is not a big secret because it's been already published, and the fact that Ukrainians are operating behind the enemy lines is not surprising to anyone. But I think you already can see the patterns. Oh, there are special forces operating. There are special forces operating. There are special forces operating. We know there is partisans and special forces are operating in here. So we already kind of, again, not a big secret. It becomes quite clear why Budanov was so secretive, because remember, he's a head of intelligence and special forces. It's clear that there are up to some kind of extensive operation that's going to be happening behind the enemy lines. What it is, we don't know. How they operate, how they're moving around, we don't know. That's why they're forces. That's why they're special forces. So, and because they're special forces of Budanov, we can guarantee that something very, very special is going to come for Russians as well. Generally speaking, I've seen Ukrainian commanders report on the situation on the south, and what Russians have been saying about the Ukrainian offensive being failure and so on. I'm not even going to bother about the numbers that they're putting up about number of tanks being destroyed. It's completely irrelevant. But the point is that they are putting essentially the parallel that whatever is happening right now is just a light foreplay to what's coming ahead. And with that teaser, we're going to move on to other front lines. Russians are trying to distract Ukrainians, so they are trying to essentially do what they have been doing before. They're trying to activate some of these front lines. It's heavy fighting. Like, that's why it's hard for me to say, because like there is no movement, but there is Russians that are trying to attack and destruct Ukrainian forces, trying to bind Ukrainian forces as much as they can. And it's very important we mention it because there is an activity. While we don't see the map movements, it's very important to see that it's happening. And actually the same kind of is happening right now in Bakhmut. That Russians are really trying to counterattack, do something. It's all not going very well. Like I'm hearing a lot of reports that like Russian prisoners taken, Russians destroyed, and so on. So Russians are burning through a lot of their reserves, a lot of their accumulated reserves, but they just want to drag on time. They want to essentially do what Ukraine did and get to winter, get to at least, the rainy weather and prolong the time as much as possible. This is the situation that they're in, and basically we now have Uno reverse card, as Ukraine was trying to delay Russians. Now it's Russians that are trying to delay Ukraine. Just different tactics, because they cannot do complex defensive operations. Their doctrine states, if you want to prevent an attack on you, attack first. That's how it is. We know a little bit more about this area about here. Russia has concentrated a lot of forces in this area. They did attack into the forests. However, Ukrainians were smart enough, and as far as I understood, they started attacking towards kind of direction undercutting them. And Russians realized that, so they started instantly redeploying and trying to secure their flank, which allowed Ukrainians to strike them right in the face and retake before lost positions in the forest. This is no changes on the map. It's just to know that there is an activity here. Additionally, people say that also Russians are trying again to move towards Liman, towards Zarishny, Yampolivka, just so you know. Around north here, Dvorichna, there are two things that Ukrainians know Russia wants to do, and they're preventing it very, very well. One thing, what Russians want to do is they want to move closer towards Kupiansk. So they want to move kind of along the river. That's something that is being prevented. They're trying to advance, but they're being stopped every time. And then second thing, around this area of Dvorichna, Russians are trying to cross the river at the north here. So it's again being prevented. Ukrainians are saying they're having really good fortified positions, defensive positions here that they've secured. So we shouldn't worry, despite Ukraine not having maybe as much resources dedicated to this area, they are still holding on quite well. Wow, that was a massive update. I'm hoping that I will be able to give more update in this weekend about the situation developing. Stay tuned for me, stay tuned for this channel, support this channel on Patreon, or even better, go to the link that is in description, because we are gathering money for the Ukrainian military to buy them a truck. Join our truck campaign, support Ukrainian military, join the Discord. I love you all, guys. Slava Ukraini, and I'll see you next time.
Звертаємось до вас. Ukraine Matters і 69-та Сніфінг бригада. Допоможіть нам, будь ласка, машиною для виконання бойового завдання. Ми знаходимося під Кремінною. Це 95-та бригада, 13-й батальйон. Будь ласка, допоможіть нам машиною.